What do you think? We can probably get going. The beginning's introductory and we get more into the crux of it a little bit later on. So welcome everybody and thank you so much for coming along today. It's great to have had quite a bit of interest in today's session. I will just start by sharing my screen. So I hope you can see the presentation there. Yep, great. So thanks for coming along today, everyone. So in this webinar, I'll be giving an overview of the due diligence requirements for grant recipients here at the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. So due diligence is really about us working with you to make sure that your organisation has a really strong foundation for your proposed project to succeed and to achieve its goals and to make sure that it's implemented safely. So today will really be a step-by-step guide through the process that we have here so that you better know what to expect and what we will ask you for. And really the take-home message is to not overthink it too much and to get in touch whenever you have any questions. So I'd like to start by recognising and acknowledging the traditional owners of the Great Barrier Reef and its catchments as the First Nations people holding the dreams, hopes, traditions and cultures of the reef, and acknowledging the Yirraganji and Gimoy Wallabara Yidinji peoples whose traditional land I'm on here today in Cairns, and acknowledge their elders past and present and their ongoing custodianship and the great work that they're doing looking after this very beautiful corner of the world. So online today we have GBRS Contract Manager, James Rann, and he's here to answer any questions. He's responsible for signing off on due diligence documents. And James, please also jump in at any time if you have something to add or clarify. We also have Karen Gerhardt, who's the Associate Director of the Traditional Owner Partnerships team, also to answer any questions. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Pia Harkness. I am program coordinator in the Traditional Owner Partnerships team looking after the Healthy Water grants. So this presentation covers the due diligence requirements for small to medium grants of up to $500,000 at the foundation. There are other requirements for grants over that amount, so we're not covering everything. We're really focused on our traditional owner grants. What we'll look at today is firstly, what is due diligence and why do we need to do it? We'll look at GBRF's due diligence requirements, and they differ based on the project size and the activities that are being undertaken. But basically it incorporates some background checks that we do, insurances for your organisation to hold, your work health and safety and fieldwork policies, and risk assessments. So I'll go through in some detail what we mean with each of those. I'll also provide some examples of approved documents so you can see how people have approached this. And at the end, there'll also be links to some helpful resources to help you develop policy documents. So this webinar is being recorded and it will be available online. We are also going to save this as a PDF so that all of those links are live, and we'll distribute that and it will go online as well so you can access those resources. So I'd just like to note that at times it might look complicated or seem complicated, but the message is that we're here to work through it with you. We've done it with many other groups, so we're pretty good at it now. And yes, we're always on the end of the phone. So as this is a webinar, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the question and answer function that will be at the bottom of your screen. If you have any comments or just want to chat and everyone can see your comments there, you can also use the chat function. So from a really broad perspective, due diligence is about our assessment of the overall project and the organisation delivering it to make sure it has the best chance of successful outcomes. So that means we're looking at your project and your organisation in terms of your readiness to implement the project, your ability to administer the funds and to operate safely. It's also part of our agreement with the Australian government under the Reef Trust Partnership. So they have funded us with a grant. We are sub-granting those funds to you. And so together we are responsible to the Australian government and to the Australian people, because it's their taxpayer funds that are funding these projects. So it's about us working together with your organisation to make sure you have a really strong opportunity to operate successfully and to safely deliver your project. So to be project ready and eligible to receive Australian public funds, you need to have a few things in place, and that includes appropriate insurances, work health and safety policies and procedures, and risk management systems and processes, and we'll be looking at what those look like a little later on. And it's really about managing risk by ensuring that the organisation is able to deliver the project, that your staff and volunteers are safe during project activities, and that you have appropriate insurances in place in case an accident does happen. So here at GBRF, we'll work with you to help advise you on what you need for this grant and direct you to resources to get your policies and processes together if you don't have them, or to update them if you need to. We can't actually develop the policies or procedures with you, but we can and we will talk it through with you what's required, and we can point you to available resources and examples that you can edit or adapt for your needs. And we can also provide worked up examples of our GBRF forms. So a lot of what we cover, yes, it's for your grant with us, but these are also things that you'll need in place to access other grant or other funding opportunities. So it's about helping your organisation to make sure you're business ready for any opportunity that comes along. So when do the checks happen? So due diligence comes into play at many stages during the application and assessment process. You will have seen in the guidelines document and in the application form that we look at your organisational capacity as one of the assessment criteria, and as part of the eligibility that you declare that you either hold or are willing to hold necessary insurances. So it's peppered throughout the grant process. However, we will come to you to ask for documentation after we've been through the assessment and our director has signed off on it and the announcements of successful and unsuccessful applicants are informed. We'll come to do these due diligence checks before your contract is signed. So in the past, we have at times experienced that it can take some groups a while to get things in order, and what we really encourage you to do is to not overthink it and not get overwhelmed. Talk to us, we can help you through it, and we can make sure that you get your contract signed and executed so you can start your project. For the second round of Healthy Water grants, it is a little bit different. For the KESO level grants at 500,000, we are looking for some of your documentation as part of the assessment process, and we've already been in touch with those groups about that. So this slide is to show that there are 3 levels of due diligence at the foundation, and as the size of your project and the risks of your activities increase, the requirements also increase. So don't worry too much at the moment if you're not familiar with some of these due diligence processes and tasks that are outlined. The main point here is to show that at the baseline level, so for all projects, we will be doing some background checks, which include looking at your ABN, the WGEA list, which I'll explain in a moment, your track record, insurances, and also a COVID safety plan if you're doing any face-to-face work. As soon as you start to do any field work or outdoor activities, we will send to you the GBRF WHS contractor pack. That's 2 documents. I'll explain what they are and I'll show you those in a moment. And then if you're doing high risk activities, and they include crane lifting, excavation and trenching, mobile plant, diving, snorkeling, working on or near water, or using drones or doing fire management, there are forms or specific requirements around those as well. So to look at the baseline level, at the beginning we'll check your ABN, which is required for doing business in Australia. the Workplace Gender Equality Agency has a list of organisations that haven't complied with their obligations under the Workplace Gender Equality Act. And so any organisation that is listed on there is ineligible for federal government funding. So we will check that list. We will look at your reputation or your tracked record. So you will have seen in the guidelines that there's a requirement that the applicant has no outstanding reports or financial acquittals with GBRF. So we'll look internally if you've already had a grant with us. We also show that proposed activities can't be funded by another grant. So we'll be checking in with other agencies that administer funds, including the federal and the state governments, for example, for groups with ranger groups, or looking after country grants or other grants, to check that you're meeting your obligations to funders and that the work that you have proposed hasn't been funded elsewhere. Also, as mentioned, if there are any face-to-face activities, then we'll also need a COVID-safe plan. Then we'll move on to insurances. So successful applicants need to hold these insurances, and we will ask for the certificate of currency to show that you have them. The first one is public liability insurance of $20 million. Workers' compensation insurance is required whenever you're paying anyone wages. Professional indemnity insurance of $5 million and for 7 years, which is the statute of limitation. This one can be relaxed if you don't have professional indemnity insurance and you won't be providing any professional advice in the course of your project with GBRF, then you can ask for a relaxation with this one. So please do talk to your grants program manager if you think that's you. And you will also require volunteer accident insurance if you have volunteers working on your project. Additionally, if you are using any machinery or boats or specific vehicles, we will need to see insurances for those. If you are working with a contractor or a partner and you're using their equipment, we will require confirmation in writing from you that you'll make sure that the contractor or the partner has those insurances in place. And the same applies also for drone insurance. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on these shortly. And just a note also, throughout your project, you will have progress payments, and your insurance is typically valid for 1 year. We have your certificate on file. So if it has expired, we will be asking for your renewed certificate before we can process any payments. So your insurances need to be up to date for those progress payments to be made. So moving on to comprehensive and high risk activities, the reality is that nearly all of our healthy water grants and most of the grants we fund do involve some level of field work, and so you will need to look at and meet these work health and safety requirements. So the work health and safety contractor pack consists of 2 documents, and they belong together, they talk to one another. The first is the GBRF Contractor Work Health and Safety Requirements document, and the second is the Work Health and Safety Questionnaire. So the requirements document outlines what our requirements are. The questionnaire is where you can show us your policies and procedures and how you meet those requirements. On top of those, there are the contractor safety critical control self-assessments for the high-risk activities that I mentioned earlier. So each of these, the first 6 there, have a specific form with controls or measures to put in place to minimise risk, and I'll show you what these look like. And then for drones or fire management, there are special conditions around those, which I think I talk to in a moment. I do. So the first document is the Contractor Work Health and Safety Requirements document. It's 9 pages, and its purpose is to make sure that contractors, so that's grant recipients, are aware of the Foundation's work health and safety expectations and requirements. These apply to all contractor organisations operating under their own management system while conducting activities that are funded by GBRF under an agreement. So there are 19 components of WHS and risk assessment that we have requirement for. And these are actually not just our requirements, but these are legal requirements. And they apply to all contractor organisations. So 19 sounds like a lot, but when you look at them, a lot of the requirements are actually quite short. So for example, performance reporting, contractors are required to provide WHS performance reports during their review process, and that's part of our reporting template. So we'll ask if you've had any WHS incidents. So some of these requirements apply to all projects, but some of them will require only to specific projects. So for example, plant and equipment or hazardous materials only apply if you're doing those activities in your project. So on the last page of the WHS requirements document, there are some boxes to tick, and this basically is just to show that you have received the necessary forms. So once we're ready to do this, we'll send you the forms. We will have had a look at your application to see what activities you're doing. We'll send you the requirements form, the questionnaire form, and any of the contractor safety critical control self-assessment forms for activities that you're doing in your project. So you just tick here to say that you've received them, and then sign and confirm that you have read and you've understood the requirements. Then there is the WHS engagement questionnaire. Don't get too overwhelmed. There's a lot of boxes here, but this is a 3-page form. I've got the whole form on one slide. So there are 5 sections. The first one is your details and the details of your organisation. The second is whether you have a certified or accredited work health and safety management system. This generally only applies to quite big organisations. Most of the organisations we work with don't have this, so it's totally fine to tick no there. Then there's section C, which is the workplace health and safety management system, which is about what systems, processes and policies you have in place. On the next slide, I'll look at this in a bit more detail. Section D looks at your work health and safety performance. So I think it's in the last 3 years, how many incidents of work-related illness or injury have you had? And the last section asks you to identify which of the contractor safety critical control self-assessments are applicable to your project. So they're the high-risk activities that I listed earlier. So section C is really the important section here, and this is where it asks you to identify and supply to us your work health and safety policies, procedures and processes. This is what it looks like. Each of the questions here is aligned with the 19 components that are in the work health and safety requirements document. So this is where we ask what processes and procedures you have in place and to please provide us with those. And these are legal requirements. We don't measure the validity of the documents that you supply. We just need to see that they exist. So generally what that means is some sort of a policy, if you have it, or a statement about your processes, and how your organisation deals with each of these WHS legislative components. What we suggest is if you're writing us a statement, why not add it to your policy so it's there for future reference. So these policies are about you and your organisation and what you have in place, and this is a really good opportunity to review things and get things, update them if necessary. So section E then again asks you to identify those high risk activities, if any are relevant to your project. So if you're using drones, we ask you here to provide evidence of insurances, licenses and registrations. So they are all the CASA requirements. If you're using a drone that's supplied by a contractor or a partner, we ask you to provide in writing a declaration that says that you'll make sure that your contractor or partner has all of those. And the same applies also for fire management if you're doing it, to provide fire management safety policies and procedures, or a declaration that you will make sure that your contractor has these. And again, we'll be looking at your forms and we'll be looking at your proposal to make sure that everything that you've supplied with us fits with what you're proposing, what your activities will actually be. So here is an example of how one group has addressed the form. I've got the plain form up the top. You can see the boxes that are there, tick yes, and then provide your policy. What we really love to see here is reference to those policies. So yes, we have the policies. Please see our work health and safety policy. Some policies and systems are really, really comprehensive. So if you can direct us to where in your policy the specific thing is, that's really helpful for James and myself when we're trying to find it. So you can say, see page 7. This group has also said, please see our work health and safety policy and our checklist for their risk management methodology. And you can see here that they've ticked no and said not applicable to project activities for hazardous chemicals because they're not using hazardous chemicals. So again, some things apply to your organisation and in general, some things apply to your activity. So if you have any questions about this, just get in touch with us and we can give you some advice. Now we'll move on to the contractor safety self-assessment audits. The example I'm looking at here is the working over or near water example. A lot of our healthy water grants obviously need to use these, but the form differs because the risk and the activity differs depending on those high risk activities. I won't go through all of them today. So basically what this is about is that it's about you and us acknowledging that there is a risky activity happening in place, that you've analysed the risks and that you agree to put some measures or some controls in place to reduce that risk. So the items that we've listed in the left-hand column, they are measures that we require you to put into place for these activities to reduce risk. So there are a few different ways of filling out these forms. This is one example where the grant recipient has said, yes, we have a risk assessment, we have provided it. Please have a look at our work health and safety policy. They've said here that we don't have our own boat, so we'll be using a chartered vessel for all works. Before use, we will check with the boat operator that the boat is suitable for the work and the weather at the time, that it complies to relevant Australian standards, and that they hold the appropriate licenses and registrations. We'll make sure there will always be 2 people on board, a driver and a staff member. We'll make sure the charter operator has a suitable emergency plan in place, that the rescue equipment on board is suitable, and that the communication equipment works properly and local laws are checked and adhered to. And also that safety gear such as life jackets are available for everyone on board. So we're looking for a declaration that says, if it's your boat, yes, we're aware of these risks, we will make sure that we do these things to reduce them. Or if it's a contractor, that you will make sure that the contractor is doing all of these things. So it is really about liability. Sometimes organisations have in their work health and safety detailed risk assessments for activities that they know that they'll be doing, so you can refer to those if you have them in place. In some times there may be additional risk factors, for example, crocodile risk, where we might need a specific risk assessment. Here is another example where the organisation has addressed each of those items in line. And here's one more on excavation and training, where they've just written one spiel in the Word document saying that they'll adhere to all of the requirements. They've ticked NA for one, which you can see is about using heavy equipment on a slope greater than 45 degrees. That's not applicable to their project, so they've ticked NA. And if you tick NA, we just would like a little explanation about why that doesn't apply. So they're reasonably straightforward, but if you have any questions or unsure, please just get in touch with your program coordinator and we can give you some examples of how other groups have approached it, and we can talk it through with you. So that's really all of the documentation that you will see from us. The message is we're here to help. If you're feeling stuck or overwhelmed or have a question, just get in touch. We'll talk through the requirements with you. We can provide you with worked up examples. We can provide resources for policy development if needed. And what we can and often do is if you send us what you have, we'll send it on to James, who very gratefully looks over all of it, and then he'll come to us and say, yes, this is all fine, except we need X, Y, and Z. So then we can be very specific about what else we need to see. And here I'll just share with you some of the resources I mentioned earlier. The Institute of Community Directors has a really comprehensive policy bank that's very useful for templates that you can adapt to your organisation's needs, including WHS policies, risk management, injury and incident reporting, and first aid, but there's many, many more on there. The First Nations Media Policy Bank also has really great resources specifically for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations. So they cover off on some things that aren't so relevant to non-Indigenous organisations, like Indigenous cultural and intellectual property policy or social media policy. So how are you using photos, for example, in your communications? They also have really great risk policies. So they've got a risk management policy, and a procedures template and a risk management register template. You can also look at WorkSafe Queensland that has a lot of tools, and this link takes you straight to the tools page. It can be a little tricky to find what you're looking for on there. Safe Work New South Wales has similar templates, and I found their website to be slightly easier to navigate. So we'll PDF this and send it out so that you have access to all of those resources. And that's really it from our end today. I hope I didn't miss anything, James or Karen, and I can't actually see if any questions have come through. Are there any questions from the floor?
There was just the one from Jamie asking for a copy of the links. And so, I mean, I think you answered that, which is that we're going to send this talk around and it's going to have the live links in it. So everyone will be able to just go to the end of this talk and just click on the links that Pia just talked about and go off and find that. But chances are you've got quite a lot of paperwork in place, and so you can just have a reflection on that and see how you're going and seeing if you're up to speed with everything.
Great. Well, we hope that was helpful. And again, for Healthy Water 2.0, we're still in assessment mode, but we will be in touch once those applications have been assessed. And we're always here should you have any questions. Thank you very much. Shall we leave it there?
Thanks, Pia. Thanks, everybody, for coming on.
Thanks. Bye.